This empress refused to drink any water except the water brought to her from the Trevi fountain, and she insisted on spending the night inside the chambers of the Pope himself. Behind closed doors, courtiers whispered that Mexican shamans had poisoned her mind and driven her into madness. In today's video, I will tell you the story of Charlotte of Belgium, Empress of Mexico, one of the most ambitious and proudest women of her age, the sister-in-law of Empress Sisi, and the first cousin of Queen Victoria. And we will try to discover what truly happened to her, and what turned this extraordinary woman into a prisoner of her own mind for almost 60 years. Leave a like, and let's begin. Do you believe that naming a child after someone who has died can somehow affect their fate? The father of today's heroine, King Leopold I of Belgium, clearly did not believe in such omens, because when his daughter was born on June 7, 1840, he named her after his late first wife, Princess Charlotte of Wales. This was the very same Charlotte who was supposed to become queen instead of Queen Victoria, and whose death in childbirth changed the course of history forever. From early childhood, Charlotte was a lively, outspoken girl, and she grew up surrounded by happiness and affection within her family. She also spent a great deal of time at Windsor Castle with her cousin, Victoria. But that happy childhood lasted only until the age of 10, when the first in a long series of tragedies struck her life. Her mother died, and her father, unable to cope with his grief, fled from his children to another residence, and almost completely stopped communicating with them, which, of course, did nothing to make the situation easier. And so, the cheerful and energetic little girl gradually turned into a withdrawn teenager, lost in her own thoughts. Charlotte found comfort in books and education. By the age of 13, her favourite author was Plutarch, while she considered Ovid childish. The combination of the beauty she inherited from her mother and the status of a Belgian king's daughter that came from her father made Charlotte an extremely desirable bride. But she was not the kind of woman who was willing to marry without love. Queen Victoria and Charlotte's father suggested King Pedro V of Portugal as a possible husband, but she rejected his offer of marriage. However, if anyone managed to capture Charlotte's heart, it was Archduke Maximilian of Austria, the ambitious and scandalous younger brother of Emperor Franz Joseph I. Looking at his photographs today, it may be difficult for us to understand the reason for her excitement, but after their very first meeting in May 1856, she announced to everyone, "He is the man I will marry." And the strangeness of her choice was not only that Maximilian wore hideous sideburns of which he was extremely proud, but also that he was merely the emperor's younger brother, effectively a spare, whose destiny seemed to be a secondary role. For some reason, however, Charlotte became convinced that greatness awaited them together, and on July 27, 1857, the young couple were married, uniting the House of Habsburg-Lorraine with the recently established Belgian dynasty. If you have seen my video about Empress Sisi, then you already know that the mother of Franz Joseph and Maximilian, Archduchess Sophie, was far from being an easy mother-in-law. She practically tormented poor Sisi with strict court etiquette, constantly criticised her, and was never satisfied with anything she did. So everyone was even more surprised when Sophie actually took a liking to her second daughter-in-law, Charlotte. She even wrote in her diary, "I feel as if I had always loved her. I thank God with all my heart for the charming wife he has given Max." Naturally, after enduring years of abuse from her mother-in-law, Sisi unconsciously redirected all the resentment she had accumulated inside onto this young woman, calling her a pretentious little Coburg. At that time, Sisi was also devastated by the death of her little daughter, Sophie, and it infuriated her that Charlotte was welcomed with magnificent celebrations, while she herself was still grieving. In short, their relationship was doomed from the very beginning. And when Elizabeth's dog killed Charlotte's dog, which had been given to her by Queen Victoria, the tension between them finally turned into an outright war between the two women. During the very first years of their marriage, the couple was forced to face the harsh reality of both their personal lives and their political fate. Maximilian turned out to be an unfaithful husband and very quickly acquired a large number of mistresses. It was probably from one of them that he contracted some kind of venereal disease, which may have been the reason the couple never managed to have children. But Even though Charlotte's dream of her fairy tale prince ended in painful disappointment, she understood that she and Maximilian had to stay together, if not as passionate lovers, then at least as partners. After all, you still remember that she believed her husband could become a great ruler. So when, in September 1857, Franz Joseph appointed Maximilian governor of the Kingdom of Lombardy-Venetia, the part of Italy that still belonged to the Habsburgs at the time, the couple went there full of enthusiasm and determined to put all their liberal ideas into practice. They built themselves the beautiful Miramara Castle, rolled up their sleeves, and began trying to introduce reforms in a country that saw them solely as foreign occupiers. Just 2 years later, the Italian liberation movement gained strength. Lombardy was reclaimed by the Italians, and Maximilian was abruptly removed from office by his own brother for failing in his duties. For both his ego and Charlotte's ambitions, this was a crushing blow and a terrible humiliation. And it was at that exact moment, when the couple was left standing among the ruins of their dreams, that Napoleon III appeared with a tempting offer to become Emperor and Empress of Mexico. You have to admit it was a rather unusual proposal. But how could two people who had absolutely no connection to the country possibly claim its throne in the first place? Let us try to figure it out. To understand how this happened, we need to go just a little deeper into the history of Mexico. In 1821, after a long war, Mexico finally gained its independence from the Spanish Empire. Did it use that independence wisely? No. During the first 24 years of its existence as an independent country, Mexico went through 40 different governments, while General Santa Anna alone managed to become president 11 times. Conservatives and liberals were locked in a permanent war, and one general after another seized power, creating a situation that France, quite remarkably, decided to take advantage of. When Mexico stopped paying its foreign debts, France sent troops into the country, and Napoleon III decided to establish a puppet monarchy there that would remain loyal to France. His choice fell on 30-year-old Maximilian, who had recently had his kingdom taken away from him in such a humiliating manner, and was now sitting at home with absolutely no idea what to do with himself. Max may not have been a political genius, but he was not an idiot either. When he was offered the Mexican crown, he understood that the entire arrangement smelled extremely suspicious, and he was in no hurry to accept. Charlotte, however, was delighted and immediately decided that restoring the Mexican monarchy had now become the great purpose of her life. Besides, this was her chance to become an empress, just like her sister-in-law, Empress Sisi, whom she disliked so much. To convince Maximilian, Napoleon III quickly produced a delegation of supposed Mexicans who begged him to lead their country, and then showed him the results of a vote that allegedly proved the Mexican people were waiting for him with open arms. Napoleon presented the whole situation as though there were already an empty throne in Mexico that was simply waiting for Maximilian and Charlotte to occupy it, while French troops would always be there to protect them. And so, persuaded by these promises, Maximilian officially became Emperor of Mexico on April 10, 1864, while Archduchess Charlotte became Empress Carlota. But all their dreams of a beautiful new life in a new land were shattered on the very first day of their arrival, May 13, 1864. It immediately became clear that the palace where they were supposed to live was practically in ruins, and on his first night, the emperor had to sleep on a billiard table. But that was the least of their problems. Despite all the idyllic stories about butterflies and calla lilies in the gardens of Mexico that they had been fed back in Europe, they soon discovered that they had arrived directly in the middle of a civil war that was unfolding alongside a war of liberation. They had 30,000 French soldiers at their disposal, scattered across a country 4 times the size of France, and those soldiers simply could not cope with the local population, who had no intention of accepting foreign invaders. To Maximilian's credit, he rolled up his sleeves and genuinely tried to govern. He issued laws and attempted to reconcile the liberal and conservative parties, which had already been fighting each other for 25 years. But during the very first year of his reign, he also made several unforgivable mistakes. First, he spent the last remaining money in the treasury on renovating the castle. Second, he decided to adopt the grandsons of Mexico's first emperor, believing that this would somehow allow him to insert himself into the country's existing royal dynasty. The result was a complete disaster. Charlotte was strongly opposed to the idea, especially when Maximilian sent her to practically take 2-year-old Agustin away from his very much alive and loving mother, who was then simply deported from Mexico. The entire affair turned into a scandal that was not remotely amusing, and the popularity of the imperial couple, which had never been particularly high to begin with, fell even further before the end of their very first year on the throne. At that point, Maximilian decided to radically change course, abandoning liberalism in favour of dictatorship. He began carrying out mass executions of the rebels, putting several hundred people to death without trial or investigation, and this became the final nail in the coffin of his reign. By January 1866, it had become clear that Emperor Napoleon III, under growing pressure from public opinion, had decided to begin withdrawing his troops from Mexico. For Maximilian and Charlotte, this was a fatal blow, because it was only thanks to the French army that they had been able to remain on the throne at all. In a desperate attempt to save both her husband and their crown, Charlotte decided to personally convince Napoleon III to reconsider his decision. She sailed to Europe and arrived in Paris, bringing with her 20 pages filled with arguments explaining why France had to continue supporting them. But Napoleon III was no longer prepared to save the Mexican monarchy at the cost of his own position. Charlotte felt horribly betrayed. Everything they had been promised had turned out to be a complete lie, and the realization shattered her entire world. She did not want to beg members of her own family for help, so she decided to turn to the Pope. After all, she and Maximilian were Catholic monarchs, and she believed they could count on the support of the papal throne. But even on the way to Rome, her condition continued to deteriorate. She began seeing Napoleon's agents everywhere and became convinced that he now wanted her dead. As her carriage passed a farmer on the road, she suddenly began screaming that he was an assassin and ordered the driver to go faster and faster. By the time she arrived in Rome, she was completely beside herself. She refused to drink any water except water from the Trevi fountain, believing that all other water might be poisoned. And when the Pope finally received her, she sobbed hysterically and refused to leave his chambers because she believed assassins were waiting outside the walls. Pope Pius IX was left with no choice but to allow her to spend the night in the papal library. And so, Charlotte became the first woman ever to sleep inside the Vatican. News of the Empress's condition was immediately sent to her brother Leopold, who managed to bring his sister back to Miramar Castle and summoned a psychiatric doctor to examine her. As you can imagine, medicine at the time was still very far from what it is today, and psychiatry was barely in its infancy. Charlotte was diagnosed with insanity, accompanied by obsessive delusions of persecution. Rumours immediately began to spread that either Napoleon III had deliberately driven the Empress mad, or that the enemies of her husband had used mysterious potions prepared by Mexican shamans to destroy her mind. One way or another, Charlotte, who still experienced brief moments of clarity, was now locked away in a castle with no real chance of receiving proper help or ever returning to a normal life. When Maximilian learned of his wife's condition and realized that his empire was collapsing before his eyes, he began preparing to return to Europe. But his Mexican supporters continued to pressure him, insisting that the empire could still be saved and that giving up the throne would be an act of shame. In the end, Maximilian announced that he would stay. He took personal command of the army and set out to meet his own destruction, no longer calling himself an emperor, but simply a commander. Even though he had only 9,000 men, he managed to hold out against a rebel army of 40,000 for 71 days, until one of his own generals betrayed him, and he was taken prisoner. His supporters offered to help him escape, but Maximilian refused to flee alone and abandon his companions to their fate. He also refused to shave off his famous beard. If he were caught disguised and clean-shaven, he believed it would look unmanly. So now we understand that Charlotte probably did not fall in love with the beard after all, but with the dignity that Maximilian undeniably possessed. Franz Joseph refused to believe until the very end that the Mexicans would dare to execute a member of the House of Habsburg. The other royal families of Europe did not believe it either, and they sent letters to Mexico demanding his release. Nevertheless, Maximilian was executed at 6:40 in the morning on June 19th, 1867, just 17 days before his 35th birthday. Charlotte's family decided not to tell her about her husband's death, fearing that the news would make her condition even worse. It was only 6 months later, during one of her brief moments of clarity, that Charlotte learned Maximilian had been killed. She was devastated and announced that she now considered herself dead. She also said that she would wait for him for 60 years, and this prophecy spoken over her own life eventually came true. Charlotte outlived her husband by exactly 60 years, spending them trapped in a madness that only grew deeper and more severe with time. Franz Joseph preferred to keep her in isolation, and not one of the many members of the Habsburg family came to visit the unfortunate widow. Eventually, her brother Leopold decided to bring his sister back to Belgium. But if you think this was an act of mercy from a loving brother, the truth was that he was far more interested in the inheritance she was entitled to as Maximilian's widow, although Charlotte was at least provided with proper care. Years later, Empress Sisi did finally visit Charlotte when she came to meet her son's future bride, who also happened to be Charlotte's niece. Whether this visit was motivated by compassion, curiosity, or simple malice, it would be their first and last meeting. Elizabeth later described what she had seen as an abyss filled with horror. And yet Charlotte would outlive Elizabeth, her husband Franz Joseph, Napoleon III, and even her own brother. She survived every person who had betrayed her or perhaps even helped destroy her life. Charlotte died in 1927 at the age of 86. Charlotte of Belgium went down in history as Mad Carlota, the unfortunate Empress of Mexico, whose story still makes us wonder what truly drove her insane. Was it the mysterious Mexican herbs? A mind that was simply too brilliant? The endless tragedies and hardships she was forced to endure? The betrayal and the loss of all faith in people? Or perhaps that very first devastating blow, the death of her mother when she was still a child? What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments, and I will see you in the next video.